few things. Venerable Dundrup is in California right now, so he can't be here to welcome you, Venerable Kartsön. But I just wanted to let everybody know a little bit about you. You were born in Israel, and you met he met the Dharma in his 20s while backpacking in India. Few years later, he left his job as a software engineer and trained as a Tibetan monk and translator for the FPMT. He was invited to Chenrezig Institute in Australia, and he's been the resident translator for the study program for the last 17 years, which is pretty cool. I don't know anything about this class that we're going to be doing today. I'm really excited about it. So maybe, Venerable, you can tell us a little bit what's going on with it.
All right. And
thank you for coming back.
All right. Thank you very much. So first of all, thank you very much for joining in. I see some old friends and new friends amongst you. And so I think that this is the third or fourth time that I'm coming on board the great Tupten Nobling train, mobilizing teachings for people all across the world. It's a great endeavor, great project, great effort. So thank you very much for all the people that are working behind the scene and on the ground. So what I thought of doing for the next 4 weeks is to look at one of the verses that I translated for so many times in the past without stopping to really think of the meaning or the deep meaning of this verse. The verse is called the Buddhist Teachings in One Verse. It is, I think, found in the Dhammapada, which is a collection of verses, mainly coming from the Pali tradition, but also translated into Tibetan, at least possibly translated into Tibetan. And so, in short, the verse says, commit no negative action, perform perfect virtuous action, subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. So I'm just saying it quickly, but we will go over the details later on. And the way that I started to think of this verse was when I was teaching a day course, I think a few months ago, or maybe it was last year in Israel. And I was asked to pick a topic that is applicable to everyone, whether you're Buddhist or non-Buddhist, whether you're a beginner, whether you're an advanced practitioner, a seasoned practitioner. And so I kind of thought that this is something that I can run with. And then a few days before the workshop began, I started to think of what the presentation, how I'm going to approach it. And then I discovered that there's so much in this verse, so many things that I haven't thought of before. And so I got really excited about it. And I taught only a one-day course in Israel, but I thought that there's enough material in that verse to do a week-long retreat, a month-long retreat. And so I thought of sharing some of the points with you for the next 4 weeks, looking at mainly the stages of subduing our mind. But before we do that, I thought of, first off, generating a motivation in form of refuge and bodhicitta. So when we start a spiritual practice, we often do that in our meditation practice. We first off correct our motivation in terms of going for refuge, and it transforms our practice to be a Buddhist practice. So whether we are meditating on love and compassion, bodhicitta, shamatha, what have you, without refuge, those practices would be great practices, but they're not really going to be Buddhist practices. I mean, leaving bodhicitta aside for a minute, but let's say generosity and ethics and patience, love, compassion, and so forth. What makes them Buddhist practices is the motivation, going for refuge. And then we not only want to practice to become a Buddhist practice, one wanted to contribute to the causes of becoming Buddha, to the Mahayana Dharma that we practice, and we do that through engendering bodhicitta. And so that's what we do normally in our practice, but also when we start a teaching session, when we start discussion with our friends, Dharma friends and so forth, it's good to think of refuge and bodhicitta in general, because also listening to teaching, speaking of the Dharma, sharing our views with others and so forth, they all become causes that contribute to a Buddhist path and to the path of the Mahayana path, the path that leads to our own Buddhahood. So that's why we will begin our session with refuge and bodhicitta. Now, I'm not making the definite assumption that all of you hands down are Buddhists, but I suppose that many of you do consider yourself as Buddhist practitioners. And so me being a Buddhist monk, I often start my practice, my reflections and so forth with refuge and bodhicitta. And so for those of you who do not see yourself as Buddhist, that's completely okay. This session is not restricted only for Buddhists alone. And so if you feel uncomfortable for the time being in going for refuge and developing bodhicitta, think of just opening your heart, opening your mind, listening to some points that might be of help to you in your life, developing your mind, developing your inner qualities, and giving you new perspectives on how to deal with your mind. So that's what you can think of if you're not Buddhist, but for those of you who are happy to go along, jump on the Buddhist wagon, so to speak, then let's first of all take a minute or two, just to make sure that we feel okay, that our posture is working for us, that we feel comfortable. It's good to keep our back straight, but not rigid, not tense, just loosely straight. And we're just going to take a few breaths in order to calm our mind, to calm our thoughts. If you find that you have some tension in your body, then as you breathe in and breathe out, feel that you're relaxing your body, but still keep a mind that is clear and relaxed. So let's do that just for 1 minute. And then in thinking that today, we want to open our heart and our mind to a set of advice, teachings that came to us from the Buddha. And throughout many centuries, we're taught from one teacher to their student, who in turn taught it to their own student, coming down to all of our teachers, the late Kyabje Lama Sopa Rinpoche, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Geshe Sherab teaching it, your center, but also many other teachers that we have been studying with, teaching us the stages of developing our mind. And we want to develop our mind because happiness and suffering depend primarily upon our mind. And so in relying upon those teachings that came from the Buddha, we see the Buddha as our teacher that taught to us from an enlightened mind that had absolute qualities, positive qualities, and no faults, giving us Dharma teachings that were passed on through the ages, through the communities of practitioners, bodhisattvas, arhats, from one teacher to the next, to their student, until the present day, for us, they are Sangha, teaching us the way for ourselves to become Buddha. for ourselves to embody the Dhamma, and for ourselves to become Sangha. And we will rely upon the Buddha, the teacher, the Dhamma, the actual refuge, and the Sangha, the community that helps us to embody the Dhamma. We think that we are doing it not only for ourselves, but for the sake of myriad living beings, which just like us, are caught in their samsaric state, looking for happiness and wanting to avoid suffering. So we think that we're going to, at least now, open our mind, stay attentive, so that we can train our mind to discover our fullest potential in becoming Buddha. So I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dhamma, I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dhamma, I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dhamma, I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. All right. So, if you are happy to continue, I wanted to first of all start with telling you what I thought of doing in the next 4 sessions. So, as the verse says, commit no negative action, perform perfect virtuous action, subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. I wanted to start first of all with speaking of the teachings of the Buddha in general. And I think that many of us are familiar with the life story of the Buddha. Lived in India more than 2,500 years ago, born into a royal family, was sheltered from the suffering of life in general, in the confines, the walls of the royal palace. But at some stage, the Buddha left the royal palace, having encountered things that represented the suffering of sickness, birth, aging, death, and so forth, and sought out a path for completely overcoming, eliminating all the suffering that we experience. And so there are a lot of details in the Buddha's life story. But it was said that at the end of the Buddha's quest for enlightenment, he attained enlightenment under the Bodhi tree at Bodh Gaya, and having attained a state of complete and perfect enlightenment, he remained for 49 days without sharing the Dhamma with others. And there's another famous verse that says that the Buddha himself said that he remained silent at the edge of the forest without teaching the Dhamma to others, because he was fearing that others would not realize this gem-like, this amazing nectar-like Dhamma that he found. But then, luckily for us, 49 days after that, the Buddha was at Banaras or Varanasi, Sarnath, at the modern days in India. And there he came across a group of people that were practicing with him, his friends. They were his Dhamma friends. They were practicing a Hindu Dhamma. And to them, he gave the first teachings having attained the state of enlightenment. And so the first teachings that the Buddha gave were called teachings on the Four Truths. In fact, when you look at the way of classifying the teachings of the Buddha, it was said that the Buddha taught his teachings in 3 phases, and they're called the 3 wheels of Dhamma. So we have the first wheel of Dhamma, which is called the wheel of Dhamma of the Four Truths. The second wheel of Dhamma, in which the Buddha taught the perfection of wisdom sutras. And the third wheel of Dhamma, in which the Buddha made some clarifications about things that I've said before. He made fine distinctions, but also he taught us that all of us, all living beings, have Buddha nature. And so they're called wheels of Dhamma. And one of the symbolism involved with calling it wheels of Dhamma is the Buddha just like a carriage, a car moves from one place to the next on wheels, so do the teachings of the Buddha move from his mind to the minds of ourselves as disciples through those teachings. And so the first teachings that the Buddha set in motion were teachings on the Four Truths. And the Buddha taught what I think probably all of you are familiar with or heard of. So the Four Truths: true suffering, true origins, true cessations, and true paths. And this is where I wanted to start with today, to create the background, to set the scene for speaking of the Four Truths. And so I'm going to speak briefly of about the Four Truths, then see how the Four Truths are linked to those core principles of subduing our mind thoroughly, and also, of course, taking care of our behavior and cultivating virtue, avoiding non-virtue. And then later on today, starting with today and in the next few weeks, I'm going to look at the stages of subduing the mind, which is a way to look at the teachings of the Buddha in a way that is, I guess, in agreement with the steps of the path of enlightenment, the Lamrim, but also not necessarily using the same terminology as in the Lamrim tradition. So it's also, I guess, interesting to see how those teachings link up. But first thing first, let's start with the Four Truths. And so when the Buddha began with the Four Truths, he taught true suffering, true origins, true cessations, and true paths. And he gave instructions for us regarding what to do with the Four Truths. So first of all, he says, such and such a true suffering, this true suffering should be abandoned. First of all, he said they should be understood. We should first of all understand the situation clearly. Once we understand the situation clearly, then we need to look at the causes of those suffering. And the cause of suffering are to be abandoned. The cause of suffering are called true origins. Not only that, he says that there is a scenario in which we'd be able to put a stop to the origins of suffering. If we put a stop to the origins of suffering, we'll also be able to put a stop to suffering. And then he said finally that the way to do that is through cultivating true paths. So these four truths work as two pairs of cause and effect. So true origins are the causes for true suffering. True paths are the means by which we bring about true cessations. But let's begin with, first of all, true suffering. I think that while it is likely that most of you are familiar with true suffering, it's good to just create the background, the foundation for our discussion today. And so when the Buddha taught true suffering, he taught it in a variety of ways. When you study, for example, Lama Tsongkhapa's presentation on the steps of the path of enlightenment, you see that there are different presentations, different way to lay out suffering. So the threefold suffering, the sixfold suffering, two pairs of sixfold suffering, the 8 types of suffering, and so forth. But for the sake of our discussion today, let's begin with just the threefold suffering. This is something that it is likely that all of us have had before. So we have first off suffering of suffering. That refers to physical and or mental pain. All of us are thoroughly familiar with that. Not only pain of being sick, pain of sickness, but also, I guess we can also speak about the pains of getting old, the pain of being on the verge of death, and so forth. All of us can identify with the type of pain, physical pain and mental agony that we experience in those states. But when the Buddha taught the Dharma, he didn't teach the Four Truths or the Dharma as a whole in order to deal mainly with true suffering, with suffering of suffering, sorry. Instead of the other levels of suffering which go deeper than that, which we fail to understand. And so the next level of suffering that he spoke of was suffering of change. And when he spoke of suffering of change, he says that in actual fact, suffering of change is mainly the pleasure that we seek. So I experience pleasure at different points of the day. You know, I go for a swim. You know, I become really fatigued, take a break, and there's the relaxation and comfort that comes from just being relaxed. There is the pleasure that I get from drinking a cup of tea or coffee, the pleasure that I get from eating a piece of cake, the pleasure that I get from watching a movie or having a good conversation with friends. All these forms of pleasure and comfort and well-being, which are within the confines of samsara, we call by the Buddha as suffering of change. And so often we think that, or when I speak with some Buddhist friends, we get the impression that suffering of change is somewhere outside of us, as if a cake is suffering of change because it's changing from moment to moment, or that a good song playing on the radio, or a good experience, a good condition out there that gives us a pleasurable experience is suffering of change because it's changing from moment to moment. But in fact, those are conditions that contribute, that trigger our own suffering of change. It is mainly that pleasant sensation that changes into something quite quickly that is no longer satisfactory. Not only that it is no longer satisfactory, something that causes us pain, either physical or mental. So I spoke before, you might remember, about the pain of binge eating, which I'm pretty good at, binging on chocolates and cakes and so forth, starting with something that gives me pleasure, but overeating makes me uncomfortable. Either makes me nauseous, or at night I cannot get a good sleep. Sometimes, if I overeat, I start sweating, I turn from side to side. So that pleasant sensation that I had before, that pleasure that I experienced before changed into something that is unpleasant, or at least not satisfactory. Not only that, it also triggers some afflictive emotions. I crave after more food. I crave after more chocolate. I crave after another good book. I crave after another nice music night, show, entertainment, and so forth. All of these are triggered by suffering of change, which is a sense of pleasure, sense of comfort, sense of well-being that we experience in samsara. Now, it's not that suffering of change, that pleasure, is bad. It's not that I do not want to experience any form of pleasure in samsara. Actually, without pleasure in samsara, I cannot continue. I cannot go on. No, we will not be able to, I guess, go on with our life, do even a spiritual practice without experiencing some form of comfort, some form of pleasure. The problem is we're becoming attached to it and thinking that without it, my life would be ruined, that there would be no point to my life without suffering of change, without that pleasure. Not only that, we have that idea that ultimate happiness, ultimate, consummate happiness, wonderful happiness, is the happiness that we get within samsara, with money and possession and enjoyments and so forth. That will make our life perfect and happy. This is the idea that we have. But the Buddha spoke of suffering of change as something that, first of all, comes to an end and turns into suffering, into dissatisfaction, into something that compounds our samsaric experience. So, while the Buddha spoke about it in his Buddhist teachings, it was not a knowledge that was shared, that is shared only by the Buddhist tradition. There are some Indian traditions, and I believe also other traditions, that speak about the futility of focusing only on external things that bring us this pleasure, either physical pleasure or mental happiness or mental pleasure within the confines of samsara. So there are other traditions that speak about it, and while the Buddha pointed out to us what suffering of change is, and it is great, it is a great recognition, understanding that we can develop in order to reduce our attachment and disappointment in life, still, that was not the main goal of the Buddha, the main purpose of the Buddha, when he taught us true suffering. When the Buddha taught us true suffering, he referred mainly to the third type of suffering, which is called pervasive suffering, or the long term for that is pervasive suffering of conditionality. And when the Buddha spoke of pervasive suffering of conditionality, he said that, for example, look at your own body. Look at your own body. Or we can also say, look at your own mind currently, a samsaric mind. This body is limited. It is limited in that, first of all, it goes through the process of birth, sickness, aging, and death, and also many other sufferings that we encounter in between. But also because we have this body, it's just but a mere fact, by the virtue of having this body, it is guaranteed that there would be problems for us in this life. It is guaranteed that we'll have birth, sickness, aging, and death, that we will always be looking for something and not being able to find it, that again and again we will be separated from things that cause us pleasure, and again we'll come across things that cause us displeasure. It is because we have a body such as this that we experience all the other forms of suffering. So it is a built-in mechanism within this body that conditioned us to the experience of suffering, not only in this life, but also we react to situations that we encounter in our life daily. We get angry, we get attached, we get envious, we develop hostility. Of course, we have fear. We have a lot of fear and anxiety in our life. We react to different situations in wanting to protect this body. And so we create causes also that compound our suffering in future lifetimes. And so we can say that in general, what the Buddha meant is that this body is not good enough. It is guaranteed that this body that we have will give us problems and suffering. It is also guaranteed that the mind that we have now, which is rooted in ignorance, attachment, anger, and so forth, it is also guaranteed that it will give us a lot of problems and suffering. So the Buddha presented it in this way, but the purpose of the Buddha in this presentation was not to become suicidal, no, not to make us so depressed that we'll turn suicidal, in that if this body is the harbinger of everything that is bad in our life, it's not that the solution for that is killing ourselves. For we die in this life, and then we go on and take another birth. And in this life, things are actually working, all things considered, could have been way worse. There are problems with this body, but it could have been way worse for us in samsara. To begin with, there are miserable states of existence. There are other states of birth that we could have taken. Not only that we could have taken, states of birth that we will take in the future. What would be a fate should we, if and when we are born as an animal, as a preta, in a hellish state of existence? What would be the means, the tools that we would be able to work with in order to alleviate some of the suffering, some of the pain, some of the fear, the anxiety, the depression, or all the things that we will face, but also what would be the scope for developing our mind? Will be quite limited. And so we recognize that now we have a precious human body, precious human life. We have freedoms. We have richnesses. We have access to Buddhist teachings, particularly now, when COVID started, I was at Chenrezig Institute, and Chenrezig Institute in Australia is located in the bush area in Queensland. It's to the east of Australia. It's not a city center. We call it in Australia the bush, the jungle. And so for years we were talking about putting our spiritual program online, and also we had people requesting us to make the program available online, but we always had that excuse that the technology is not there yet. We don't have enough data. we don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the knowledge to do it. Then COVID happened. We went into lockdown, strict lockdown in Australia was pretty strict. And within 2 days, everything went online. No questions asked. No more excuses. Everything went online. And of course, we had some teething issues, but soon enough, we were up and running. And now we have not only a Chenrezig Institute, but look at what Thupten Nobeling is doing. I mean, this is incredible. The teachings are available to us wherever we are at around the world at any given time, not only through Zoom sessions, but also recording on YouTube and so forth, not only Thupten Nobeling's or Chenrezig Institute's activities, but other teachers from our own tradition, from others' tradition. This is incredible. So we have a precious human body, precious human life with freedoms and richnesses that we can use in order to develop our mind so that long term we'll be able to live our samsaric existence and blossom into a state of Buddha. And so, although this body is a body of suffering, in the nature of suffering, it is still a precious human body that we want to put to use in whatever way we can, not to waste any minute, in order to develop our mind towards Buddhahood. And so, going back to true suffering, suffering of change, and pervasive suffering of conditionality. These are the three sufferings that the Buddha spoke of. And he said that sufferings do not occur without no causes. Let's say without no reason, as we sometimes say. So suffering does not occur without any reasons, without we depending upon compatible causes and conditions. Suffering occurs because the causes and conditions for suffering play a part in the development of either physical suffering, mental suffering, suffering of change, and of course, pervasive suffering of conditionality. And the causes for suffering, in short, as the Buddha presented them, were karma and afflictions. And so karma, I think that all of us know the word karma. The meaning of karma is an action that we perform, to be positive action or negative action. And the next moment after performing that action, it leaves a certain trace upon our continuum, upon our mind, either positive trace or negative trace. We call those traces imprints in general. And so we have positive actions, negative actions. I guess that also all of you have heard of the 10 non-virtues, 3 non-virtues of body, physical non-virtuous actions, killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, or those of speech, lying, divisive speech, abusive speech, harsh speech, or idle chatter. Then we have those of the mind, covetousness, ill will, malice, and wrong views. The opposite of that, the intentional action of refraining from those non-virtuous actions, but also often doing the exact opposite, in not only avoiding killing, but saving others' life. Not only saving others, but also protecting them in whatever way we can, even protecting them from mental fear. The opposite of stealing is not stealing, but also taking care of the possessions of others, or protecting others from theft and so forth. So these are karma, or karmas in general. But the underlying factor or motivation for karma are the states of mind that we have. Positive states of mind or negative states of mind. And often we say positive states of mind lead to positive behavior, negative states of mind lead to negative behavior. But within our negative states of mind, we identify the 3 principal ones, which are called the 3 poisons. So anger, attachment, and ignorance. The foundation of these 3 is ignorance. Because of ignorance, particularly ignorance of completely distorting reality. While things exist in one way, our ignorance perceives of them to exist in a way that is not only different, but often it is completely contrary to the way that they exist in actuality. While things exist dependent on other factors, independence on others, our crazy ignorance conceives of them as if they exist in and of themselves, objectively, outside of our mind, without depending upon causes and conditions, without depending upon parts, without depending on our mind seeing them, seeing reality in a particular way. And so ignorance is the foundation for all other afflictions that arise in our mind. And those afflictions cause us to perform actions. Like, for example, I come across a certain person that rubs me the wrong way today. I just don't like the appearance. There's something menacing about them, or there's something disturbing about them, or they might behave in a way that I find offensive or that I dislike. They might be too loud. And then ignorance sees them as existing like that outside of my mind, as if my mind does not play a role in seeing them in that way. They exist objectively 100% as disagreeable with me out there, either as annoying, as noisy, as offensive, as those that rub me the wrong way today. And so ignorance sees them as existing like that objectively out there as objective realities. And I completely believe that reality. And then the next step is to superimpose either negative qualities or positive qualities. If they rub me the wrong way, if they annoy me, if they say something offensive, then there is an amplification of those negative qualities. From their side, they're 100% annoying, 100% evil. The sole purpose is to make me unhappy. And then the next step is anger, wanting to harm them. And then if anger arises, it's easy to take actions based on anger. I mean, easy. We often have no control over anger. So we end up harming others. Of course, with attachment, for example, it works differently. So with attachment, there is that appearance as if there's something existing outside of my mind, as external reality, objective reality, that exists in a wonderful way in and of itself. My own happiness is inside that object. It has the ability to make me happy as an external reality, not in a way that my mind sees that, but as an external reality. If I fall in love with that person, it seems that that person in the very being, in the way that they are, they're so wonderful that my happiness depends upon them. Without them, there's absolutely no way that I could be happy. And so ignorance sees that external reality, objective reality existing outside of my mind. Then there is an amplification, exaggeration of wonderful qualities. And then attachment cannot tear itself away, cannot bear to be away from that object for even a minute. It's sometimes attachment is described like this drop of oil that is sipped into a cloth that is so difficult to remove. With attachment, we cannot remove our mind from the object of attachment. We fix it thereby with that thing that if only I had it, it would make me whole, a happy person. And so from ignorance, other afflictive states of mind arise, and we act based upon our afflictive states of mind, and they perpetuate the suffering that we experience in samsara. How are we doing so far, by the way? Any questions? Any objections?
Venerable, I have just one question. Could you please define the four wheels of Dharma again, just very briefly?
All right.
Thank you.
So the term itself, a wheel of Dharma, is, you can say, setting the Buddha's teachings in motion, transferring the Buddha's teachings from the Buddha's mind to our mind. And the way to do that is through giving us those teachings. And so first off, I mean, it's not a precise definition, but it's the meaning of the term wheel of Dharma. Just like a chariot moves from one place to the next, the teachings of the Buddha move from his mind to our mind. Is it all right, Susan?
Yes, thank you. But what are the four? The second one is sutras. The first one is...
Okay. Actually, so we often speak of the three wheels of Dharma. So Tantra is not included within them. It is more of a common presentation. And so the first wheel of Dharma is called the wheel of Dharma of the Four Truths, in which the Buddha taught, he began with teachings, the four truths, but there are many other sutras included within this presentation. In fact, everything that the Buddha taught after that was an extension of the Four Truths. And so this is the first wheel of Dharma. It took the Buddha a few years to teach the wheel of Dharma, the wheel of Dharma of the Four Truths. The second wheel of Dharma was the wheel of Dharma of, I think it's called non-entityness, which is a kind of a really weird term, non-entityness, in which the Buddha taught emptiness. He taught selflessness. The teachings took place at Rajgir, which is not far from Bodh Gaya nowadays. It was the capital of a kingdom called Magadha, ruled by King Bimbisara, that was one of the patrons of the Buddha. So there is a ridge of mountains at Magadha, and one of them is called Balch's Peak. So the Buddha was hanging out with some of his disciples in that area, and in that area he taught the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. In the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, the Buddha focused on the philosophical view of emptiness or selflessness. So there are, I think as far as I remember, there are 17 sutras included within this set of teachings. And the largest one is called the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra in 100,000 verses. Then there is another one in 20,000 verses, another one in 8,000 verses. We have the Heart Sutra. We have the Perfection of Wisdom in 500 verses and so forth. So all those different teachings were grouped on the philosophical view given in Rajgir, were given, are called the second turning of the wheel. These are the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. Now, in the first turning of the wheel, the Buddha started off with saying that whatever exists by way of its own characteristics. That's what the Buddha said in the first turning of the wheel. Everything exists by way of its own characteristics. In the second turning of the wheel, when the Buddha taught the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, he said nothing whatsoever exists by way of its own characteristics. And so having given those teachings, some of the students of the Buddha came to him and said, what's the go with that? First off, he said that whatever exists by way of its own characteristics. Then you say that whatever exists, none of it exists by way of its own characteristics. So to that, the Buddha replied in turning the third wheel of Dharma. This is the third set of teachings, which is called the teachings on the turning of the wheel of making fine distinctions, in which the Buddha said, this group of phenomena is a group of phenomena that exists by way of their own characteristics, whereas other phenomena do not exist by way of their own characteristics. He taught that in a famous sutra that is called the Sutra Unraveling the Enlightened Thought. So he taught that within the third turning of the wheel, but also he taught us that all of us have Buddha nature. In the sutra that is called the Tathagata Garbha Sutra, the sutra on the essence of Buddha, essence of Tathagata. The Buddha taught that all of us have Buddha nature. So that's also in the third turning of the wheel.
Thank you very much. That helped.
No worries. Thank you. All right. And so so I spoke of true suffering, then true origins. So true origins mainly being karma and afflictions, but the whole origin process that is bringing the train of suffering to us, this endless train of suffering, begins with, first of all, beginningless ignorance that runs through the whole samsaric process since time without beginning and up until now. Then from beginningless ignorance, we pay an incorrect attention to things around us, and we either exaggerate positive qualities or negative qualities. Then other afflictive states of mind develop: anger and attachment, hostility, pride, not being conscientious, unconscientiousness, and lacking shame, lacking embarrassment, and so forth. All of them arise from that beginningless ignorance. And on their basis, we perform actions that keep us within the confines of samsara. We have no control over the birth that we have in samsara. Although we don't have any, we hadn't had any wish to be born into a body that is getting sick, that is aging, that will inevitably die, that will get, that will have physical pain, that it will be a support for mental pain. We end up going through all of those different experiences because we have control. We have no control, sorry. The control is within the hands of karma and affliction. So the Buddha said that, suppose that when you look at karma and afflictions, particularly when you look at afflictions, specifically when you look at ignorance, suppose that you understand the way that ignorance operates. Let's look at ignorance. It says, ignorance perceives of external realities, which are objective realities. It conceives of things as existing independently in and of themselves. When whatever we think of, whatever we encounter, we have that idea that it exists like that in and of itself, external to our mind. First of all, we have the appearance. We have such appearance of objective existence that appears to our mind. We spoke about the upcoming election in the US when we think of the candidates, either Kamala Harris or Trump. Whenever we think of them, whenever we see them on telly or YouTube or what have you, there is that appearance of someone that exists as they are, in and of themselves, as an independent bundle that either we agree with or disagree with, or often there are different shades of agreeing and disagreeing with, but it exists like that, external to our mind, not in the way that our mind sees them. As if, for example, Trump exists as someone that is completely abhorrent in and of themselves without our mind seeing them in this way. Or Kamala Harris, for some people, also exists in this way, appears to exist in this way, without the mind seeing it in a particular way. And the people that we like, the people that we dislike, the things that we want, the things that we do not want, all of them appear to our mind as if they exist out there, external to the mind, as independent, objective realities. So then when the Buddha taught the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, he called to question those independent realities. And he said, does reality exist in the way that we see that, in the way that it appears to our mind? Is it objective? Is it independent? Does reality exist in and of itself by its own power? And then when he presented modes of inquiry, the conclusion that he led to was that nothing exists independently. Nothing exists in and of itself, but things exist only in the way that the mind sees them. So here I'm paraphrasing some technical details, technical terms. And so often we say that things exist as being merely imputed. Things exist merely by name. Those are the technical terms that we often use. When I try to simplify them to myself, what it means is that things exist only in the way that the mind sees them. Only in the way that the mind conceives of them. They do not exist as they are, as realities which are external to the mind. They are not objective reality. They're only subjective. Which often I find that it's interesting because we're always looking for objectivity in our situation, in our life, isn't it? We want to be, journalism needs to be an objective journalism. A judge needs to be objective, what have you. So we have that sense that things can exist objectively out there without depending on the observer, without the observer playing a role in the way that reality is being formed. So of course you can be an objective judge, you can be an objective policeman, you can be an objective witness, you can be an objective observer of or journalist or what have you, with a certain degree of objectivity. But when the Buddha presented the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, it said actually when you think of reality, nothing exists independently as independent reality. Whatever exists only in the way that the mind sees that. And in presenting it in this way, what the Buddha did was saying that the ignorance that we have is completely mistaken. Things don't exist in a way that ignorance sees them. They exist in a way that is completely contrary. Ignorance conceives them to be absolutely independent, absolutely objective. When you investigate into reality, you see that nothing exists objectively independently, but whatever exists only like that from the perspective of the mind. So this is what we call wisdom. Wisdom that understands that nothing exists objectively. Things exist only from the perspective of the mind. And so when we see that, first of all, ignorance is erroneous, it is distorted, it is distorting reality, we then have the ability to put a stop to ignorance. After all, if you see your mistake as being mistakes, you can amend them. Without being able to see mistakes as mistake, how would we be able to make any change, any corrections, and how would we be able to rid ourselves of problems and issues that arise from this distorted view? And so when we understand that ignorance is mistaken, is erroneous, ignorance ceases. It doesn't function the way that it functioned before, because we do no longer believe ignorance. If ignorance will no longer function, if ignorance is ceased, also anger will not arise on that basis. Attachment will not arise on that basis. These afflictive states of mind are solely based on ignorance. When I say solely, of course, they have conditions that trigger them, but the foundation of those states of mind is ignorance. If ignorance is absent, it's like pulling the rug, on the anger, attachment, and all other afflictions. So they will also cease to exist, cease function in our mind. If a mind will not have anger, attachment, and the other afflictions, we will no longer create actions which are based on these disturbing emotions, which means that we will put a stop to true origins and thereby also put a stop to true sufferings. So the understanding that it is possible to do that comes from seeing that ignorance is completely erroneous, completely mistaken, comes from understanding reality. So this is what the Buddha spoke of when he spoke of true cessation. So he spoke of cessation of suffering and its causes. And to see that it is possible, we have to see how ignorance is erroneous, how it is distorting reality. But then in order to develop the wisdom that completely eliminates ignorance, we need to go slowly, and we need to do it in stages. When I say slowly, of course, we want to do it as soon as we can, but given that we've been going through samsara, cyclic existence, and some without beginning and happening now, it's not that just opening up a book or listening to a talk by one of our teachers or thinking about it for a month or two will be strong enough to eliminate this deep-rooted ignorance. There is a process by which we need to build mental momentum, strength, power, efficacy, like this massive atom bomb that would be able to completely obliterate ignorance. And so we begin with, first of all, setting our intention to live our samsaric existence. We understand the gravity of our samsaric existence. We understand true suffering. We become so disturbed by true suffering that we want to do something about it. Then we understand also that suffering is brought about by true origins, karma and afflictions. And so we become also determined to eliminate our karma and afflictions. What it means is that we become determined to live a samsaric existence and to become liberated from that. It's not to go to another place, it's not to cease to exist, it's to have a mind that is no longer bound by karma and afflictions, a mind that is free, a mind that has control. This is what nirvana, what liberation means, a mind that has control, a mind in which karma and afflictions have been ceased. I mean, nirvana is actually the cessation of them, but thinking of a mind that is no longer bound by karma and affliction, it would be amazing to have that kind of mind, a liberated mind. And so we need to begin with, first of all, developing this great determination to live a samsaric existence. And it also needs to be spontaneous, in a sense that currently we speak about it, we discuss it, we think about it, we read a book, we listen to teachings, and the thought of, yeah, I have to do it, I have to live cyclic existence might arise in our mind, but after those 5 minutes, 10 minutes, half an hour, 1.5 hours of thinking of the teachings, after that is gone, again, our mind craves things within samsara. Kind of we forget about what we've done 5 minutes ago, and again, we have kind of this obsession with samsara. And so when that mind that is determined to live a samsaric existence becomes spontaneous, which means that it is always present. This is the driving force. This is when we have entered the first path that the Buddha spoke of, which is called the path of accumulation. So we're building up momentum for eliminating the root of samsara. It begins with, first of all, developing that intense motivation to do that. It is once it is developed, it becomes spontaneous. It's the path of accumulation. But then we also need to develop mental stability, what we call shamatha, concentration in which the mind is at will. I guess that most of you, all of you, have tried taking up meditation. And I discover quite often in my meditation that within 1 or 2 minutes, my mind is already thinking of other things, thinking of food, thinking of meeting, thinking of traveling overseas, thinking of fun, thinking of anything that can take me away from just sitting in meditation. And so our mind is not in control, it is completely out of control. There are methods for bringing control into our mind, developing single-pointed focus. This is what we do, what we need to do in order to develop penetrative wisdom. So first of all, we need concentration. Then we need that concentration to focus on reality, to understand that reality is not objective, but it is completely subjective. Reality is only in the way that the mind sees it. So on the basis of this concentration, single point concentration, we add this penetrative wisdom. Wisdom that can look at reality and analyze it. And with concentration, that combination of concentration and wisdom is so powerful. Concentration, single point concentration does not hinder analysis. Analysis does not hinder wisdom. They're actually supportive of each other. When we get to that point, we get to the second path, which is called the path of preparation, in which we already have amazing wisdom, amazing mental strength. But still, our understanding of reality is through a conceptual thinking. It is quite a strong conceptual and also subtle way of thinking, but it's still conceptual. It's not strong enough to eliminate ignorance. We continued with this strong concentration, strong wisdom to meditate on reality, on emptiness, on the absence of objective existence, until it becomes a direct knowledge, a perception knowledge. So for example, now when I look at you, I don't look at you directly. After all, we're speaking through a screen, but let's say that I see the screen directly. My eye doesn't think of you. My eye doesn't think Susan or Danny or Kimberly and so forth. My eye sees directly. Now I'm drinking a cup of tea here, and my tongue experiences tea. It doesn't think tea. It experiences tea. And so if I habituate my mind with the wisdom of emptiness, with the support of concentration and this penetrative wisdom, I'll be able to take it to the next phase in which it is no longer a thought, but it is a direct knowledge. I can see it in the same way that I see a flower, a tree, the same way that I hear sound, that I experience flavor and so forth. It can be direct. And this is what I need in order to eliminate ignorance. That part of wisdom, direct wisdom, wisdom that directly realizes reality, that will have the power to eliminate ignorance and all the traces of ignorance. And this is what it is called the true path. And so the Buddha spoke of the four truth is called a true path. And he mainly spoke of the perceptual realization of emptiness, the direct antidote to ignorance. If I develop a true path, I'll be able to attain true cessation, cessation of ignorance and the cause of ignorance, and thereby also cessation of suffering. So true paths begin with developing what is called the path of seeing, a perceptual realization of emptiness, perceptual realization of reality. And then with that, we eliminate ignorance. We continue our meditation to the next path that is called the path of meditation. We remove more layers of ignorance, more layers of disturbing emotions until the job is completely done and we attain the path of normal learning in which, or the path of normal training in which we are now liberated from samsara. Or in a Mahayana context, we are Buddhas. Once we've eliminated everything that has limited our mind. So this is how I wanted to begin with, first of all, looking at the four truths, which will form the foundation for our discussion today and in the next 3 sessions. And so I wanted to speak of the four truths, and I'll soon stop to see if you have any questions about the four truths, but I wanted to start with that because when I look at this Buddha's teaching in one verse, it says, commit no negative action. Perform perfect virtuous actions. I have a spelling mistake here. I'll correct that soon. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. And so to subdue a mind thoroughly, absolutely to subdue a mind, we need to develop true paths. And we need to develop true paths in order to attain true cessations. In order to subdue our mind thoroughly, to completely eliminate ignorance, to completely eliminate all of our afflictive emotions, we need to start with laying the foundation for that, which is taking care of our behavior. So before we continue with that, any questions about the four truths? Questions, comments, disagreements?
Venerable, I have a question about when we go through this process through, let's see, develop intention and shamatha, mental stability, achieve that, develop concentration, develop wisdom until it becomes direct knowledge. Okay, so let's say we feel we're at that stage. How do we know that direct knowledge is not infected with some kind of delusion or wrong thinking?
So that's a great question. First of all, developing the knowledge of emptiness is quite difficult, quite it's difficult in terms of the, let's say, the intellectual endeavor to do it. Actually, kind of, I'll take a step back. When you look at Mahamudra presentation, or maybe some of you have heard the term Mahamudra, or in English, the Great Seal. One of the famous Gelugpa texts that teaches Mahamudra says that there are two approaches that we can take in on meditating on emptiness. One of them is, first of all, to study it intellectually, so to develop an intellectual understanding of the view of emptiness. And once we do that, we take it on to our meditation practice. That's the first approach. The second approach is to start with meditation. And the meditation is mainly focused on the mind. And after a very long meditation in which we can start to unravel many layers of our mind, when we get to the deepest level of the mind, understand the deepest reality of the mind, we can from that discover the understanding of emptiness, get an understanding or determine the view of emptiness. And so here within, I think that within our organization, the FPMT, which is and belongs to the Gelugpa approach, we often begin with developing an intellectual understanding. First of all, doing an academic research, academic study of the view of reality. And so we have many texts and also teachers that teach us not only what the view of reality is, but also means to assess whether our analysis and investigation are going in the right direction. And when we study this material, it can be quite heavy going. First of all, it's laden with technical terminology. I remember that when I took my first few Buddhist courses, sometimes, I think that it was in the beginning of the 90s or towards the year 2000. Whenever we got to this topic of emptiness, everyone got this kind of blank face that were the face of emptiness. It was kind of, everyone were like pulling their spiritual hair out because no one understood what emptiness means. Everything was pretty complicated. And so it begins with, first of all, getting used to the terminology, things not existing in their own, by way of their own characteristics, inherently, truly, by their own power. There is no self-sufficient, substantially existent reality. Selfness of being permanent, independent, and unitary, and so on and so forth. There's so many technical details that we first of all need to become comfortable with. It took me quite a few years as working as an interpreter, and until not only those terms were quite comfortable, but also when I had enough understanding of the import. And it's still for me work in progress. It's not that I've got it all pinned down. So what I'm saying is that it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time, and it also takes some commitment. Now, it's not that the only way to do it is to study at a center with a geshe. There are other ways which we can approach it according to our own disposition, according to our own capacity and ability. There are great books that we can read that make it more accessible. Like, for example, there's a great book by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Can't remember the precise name, but it's How to Know Yourself as You Really Are, How to Recognize Yourself as You Really Are. Great book that gives a presentation of the view of emptiness, the philosophical view of emptiness. So we do a lot of study, a lot of fact-finding effort is going into the initial phase. And within that, we also taught some technical tools in order to assess the reasoning that we use in order to understand that. Within the Gelug tradition, actually with all the traditions within Tibetan Buddhism, which is based on the Nalanda tradition that came to us from the Indian tradition, there was a system of debate that was developed based on the writing of masters such as Dignaga and Chandrakirti. Both of them were Indian masters that presented us, I think, in a way that is similar to Greek reasoning, Greek philosophy, the way to assess a certain claim, certain supposition, certain position and to check whether it is validly acceptable. We can study that, but again, it becomes very technical. If we have the aptitude to do that, it's very useful. But even if we don't have the aptitude to do that, we can do other things. We can still continue to study, to investigate, to listen to teachings, and bit by bit, we develop our rational tools. And when we develop our rational tools, it's also good to have conversations with Adama friends, conversation with teachers. Ask questions, ask whether our understanding is correct, and then go back to the drawing board if we find out we have made mistakes along the way. I think that if we don't follow the process back, which first of all, we gather information, we study, and then we also discuss it with friends, discuss it with our spiritual teachers, then we also continue to contemplate that there is a greater danger of getting it wrong, becoming nihilistic to a certain degree. And I met over the years of involvement with translation, with living in a Buddhist center, with having lots of discussions with the Dharma friends, we do come across from time to time people that adopt a nihilistic approach out of the misunderstanding of emptiness, as if, for example, if things do not exist objectively, they don't exist at all. Or it doesn't really matter or things don't really matter because things don't exist independently, inherently, and so forth. So it's good to avoid those mistakes by following a process by which we study from correct texts, from qualified teachers, that we discuss it with people around us, and we also then continue to think about it over and over again over the years. Michael shared a file with us. Let's see. Okay, it's still coming. Yeah. Thanks, Michael. How to See Yourself as You Really Are. Thank you very much, Michael. It's a great book. And so, yeah, that's what I think that these are my 2 cents on how to make sure that the knowledge that we have is correct knowledge. Basically, it has to be validated by reason, by logic, by correct reasons and logic. And we learn the logic through our teachers, through those texts. And if we have the ability to do some in-depth logic studies, at least within this tradition, there's a lot to discover, I feel.
Thank you, Venerable.
Thank you. All right. And so let's go back to that. All right. So commit no negative action, perform perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. So what I wanted to focus on is how to subdue our mind thoroughly. And to begin with, there's a question of why do we want to subdue our mind thoroughly? Why subdue the mind? And so within our tradition, we recognize that happiness and suffering arise from the mind. They do not exist as external realities. They do not exist in the objects that we encounter out there, but they arise from the mind. Of course, there are some sensations in the physical field, in the physical sphere, that do arise from the body. I mean, of course, physical pleasure comes from the body. But still, when we compare a body with the mind, we can see how a mind is so much more significant. You can be sick, you can experience pain. A physical condition might be quite poor, or you might be externally impoverished, or you might be facing a lot of challenges, and still with a mind that is resilient, healthy, happy, and so forth, those external conditions or physical condition will not bring you down. And I think that probably all of us, with our experience in life, have encountered people that were capable of facing extreme situations with resilience, with strength of mind. Or it could be that physically or externally things that are working perfectly well for us, and yet our mind is unwell. And this is maybe even more significant. We can see that more evidently around us, living in developed countries, living in Australia, for you guys living in the US or coming from other backgrounds. You can see, Australia is such an amazing country. It's a wealthy country. Of course, not everyone here in Australia is wealthy, and we now experience, a great crisis of the cost of living and so on and so forth. But, generally speaking, comparing with other places on this planet, we're doing pretty fine. Not everyone is doing fine, but in general, we're doing well. And yet, mental unhappiness is quite rife in Australia. Issues of mental health, mental unhappiness, and so forth. It is clear that it could be that physically or externally you're doing well, but your mental unhappiness overrides whatever you experience physically or your external conditions. And so from a Buddhist tradition, the mind is paramount. From Buddhist perspective, the mind is paramount, more experience than whatever we experience physically or in the environment. And our attitude, the way that we see reality, gives rise to either mental happiness or mental suffering. Particularly when we go back to the four truths, particularly when we look at true origins, karma and afflictions, and particularly afflictions, anger, attachment, and ignorance, we can see how they are mainly responsible for the suffering that we experience, or the happiness that we experience in samsara. And so for that reason, the Buddha said, subdue your mind thoroughly, because happiness and suffering arise from the mind. And that being the case, then I thought to myself, what are the stages that we can take in a spiritual practice in order to subdue our mind thoroughly? We have someone that put the hand up.
No, that was a mistake. Sorry.
Well, no worries. Cool. It just flashed and then it disappeared, and I was wondering, okay. And so I was thinking to myself, what are the stages of subduing our mind? So within the Gelugpa presentation, by the way, of course, we have stages of subduing our mind. Those are the stages of the path of the three scopes, the small scope, the medium scope, and the great scope. We have great presentations, amazing presentations, but I wanted to look at it in a way that is slightly different, but of course, it all fits well together perfectly with the stages of the path of those of the three scopes. But just in terms of the approach that we take to a practice, then the stages of subduing the mind, at least the ones that I thought of, first of all, beginning with knowing or understanding what the mind is. That's the first step. Then once we understand better what a mind is, then we can start avoiding encounters with objects that fuel our afflictions, our disturbing emotions. At least start to keep some distance from things that trigger anger, attachment, and so forth. Then the next step is to take up ethics. And that refers to, and it is linked up with the first and second line in this verse: commit no negative action, perform perfect virtuous action, taking up ethical discipline. And then still, disturbing emotions arise in our mind: anger, attachment, jealousy, pride, and so forth. They arise in our mind. So we need to continuously apply local antidotes to the afflictions. And as we apply local antidotes to our afflictions, our mind becomes, in due time, it becomes more balanced. The stormy waves of afflictive emotions subside, and then we have smaller waves. And when we are able to do that, our mind becomes more pliable to cultivating the concentration of shamatha, a single-pointed concentration. After all, I think that for those of you, for those of us who have tried taking up meditation, you find that I find that days in which my mind is completely stirred up, either by something that really fueled some anger, unhappiness, resentment, sense of belligerence, or days in which my mind is completely infatuated with an object of desire. It seems that if only I get what my mind wanted to, going to India again, seeing my teachers, having amazing Indian meal, those are the things that play out sometimes in my meditation. There's no room for cultivating concentration. My mind is completely disturbed by those stormy waves of my afflictive states of mind. And so if I can apply those local antidotes that will reduce the power of afflictions, they can still arise, but not in that kind of massive train of insanity. Just kind of that small moving train of insanity, but not massive, freight train of insanity. And so if I can reduce the power of my afflictive states of mind, I'd have a better ability to develop concentration. And so then looking at this chart, applying local antidotes to the affliction, reducing the power, then I can better develop the concentration of shamatha. And if I have the concentration of shamatha, I have a solid foundation for developing wisdom, mainly the wisdom of emptiness, mainly the wisdom that is a true path that will eliminate ignorance. And that will bring about the total subduing of the mind. And so what I thought of doing in the next 3 weeks is to go step by step to look at what the meaning is of knowing our mind. What is the meaning of avoiding encounters, what we can do, what we cannot do, when do we avoid encountering objects that fuel our afflictions. Then to look at the meaning of taking up ethical discipline, looking at different types of ethics, different types of local antidotes to the afflictions, and then finally to look at how we subdue our mind with concentration and wisdom. So that's for the next few weeks. How are we doing so far? Any questions or comments?
Well, my opinion is we're doing great. I think it's very interesting, and it's filling in a lot of gaps in my knowledge, and so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, and so we have a few more minutes left for today, so maybe let's start with understanding our mind, knowing what the mind is. So to that, we have also, I think that it's related to one of the questions that you asked Susan, related to how do we know that we are on the right track? Well, to know that we are on the right track, we first of all need to gather some knowledge, and the same thing works also with understanding what the mind is. So first of all, we gather some knowledge, we do some studies, and within a framework of FPMT, we have a lot of information material that is available to us. I think that one of the courses that you have in Tupte Nobeling is Discovering Buddhism, that offers a module on mind and awareness. I think that this is the name, Mind and Awareness. So we can study that. That's a good beginning. It provides an excellent presentation of the mind. But also there are other ways of approaching that, not only alternatives, but also things that supplement our knowledge. There's a great book of, I think, Elizabeth Napper that is called Mind in Tibetan Buddhism. It's more technical, it's more academic. I think that maybe it was part of a PhD dissertation, I'm not sure. But it's quite academic, but it provides, again, a good background knowledge. A lot of it is technical to the way that the mind works. So we start with developing knowledge, but also we need also to start with just thinking of how is it, how do we experience our own mind? What is the thing that directs our mind? And it's a good thing to discover while meditating. And when we meditate, it doesn't have to be like this formal meditation session in which we sit cross-legged for half an hour and we follow our breath and so on and so forth. It could be even 2 minutes of meditation sitting on the train. 2 minutes of meditation in which we sit on a chair. Thank you very much, Michael. You're a gem. Mine in Tibetan Buddhism. So, 2 minutes of meditation in which we look at the mind and start to notice the things that direct the mind, those impulses, the drives, disturbing emotions, those wishes, those and so we come to recognize, we come to not only possess an academic understanding of what the mind is, but also we match it up with our own personal experience. And so when we look at mind in Tibetan Buddhism, I can't remember if it also includes a list of minds and mental factors. But Lorna says there is also the book Indian Buddhist Classics in Science and Philosophy, The Mind. That's also a great source. There's a list of mental factors, mental events, mental processes that occur to us daily in our mind. And often we speak of a presentation of 51 mental events, 51 mental factors. They're the ones that are divided into 6 groups. There's a group of mental events, mental processes that are always there, always present, omnipresent. There are a group of 5 mental events, mental processes which occur when we ascertain a certain phenomenon, when we understand it, when we focus on it, like wisdom, concentration, mindfulness, and so forth. There's one group of those mental factors. There's a group of mental factors which are virtues, mental processes which we want to have: non-attachment, non-anger, non-ignorance, shame, embarrassment, conscientiousness, and so forth, non-harmfulness. So we want to know what they are so that we can develop them. And also, just as importantly, the 6 root afflictions, a group of 6 root afflictive states of mind. So learning, for example, what the defining characteristics of anger are, what the defining characteristics of attachment are. We speak about those afflictive states of mind, but if we know them, if we know what the precise definition of them is, what their characteristics are, we can then turn our focus to the mind and recognize the onset of those afflictive states of mind. Just the mere recognition of the onset of afflictive states of mind sometimes is powerful enough to damp the efficacy, the power of those stormy waves of afflictions. Like, for example, when anger arises in my mind, if I'm aware of it, I can then make that mental note. This is what is happening to me now. This is anger. First of all, my mind became unhappy because of something that happened either externally or internally. My mind was made unhappy. And then the moment after that, there is an intention to harm that is present. Just the mere recognition that this is what is happening has the ability to step back a little bit and dampen the power of anger. Of course, if I let anger dominate and continue, it will become quite difficult. When anger is fully present in a massive energetic way, sometimes I tell myself, this is anger. What's happening to me now is anger, but anger is kind of so powerful that it's really difficult to make it go away completely. But it's helpful. It's helpful also to recognize what's happening, and also to recognize that when anger is present, I behave in a way that is negative, that is harmful to others, and also is harmful to myself. So recognizing those 6 root afflictions: anger, attachment, doubt, pride, ignorance, afflictive views. And then we have a group of 20 secondary afflictions, also recognizing them, knowing what they are. So we develop not only the technical knowledge, but also we also need to then turn our focus towards the mind and recognize the onset of those afflictive states of mind. But just as important, you can say, also to recognize the opposite of those negative emotions. Recognize positive emotions, positive states of mind, virtuous state of mind, so that we can support them, we can enhance them, we can develop them on and on and on. And so that is the first step, understanding the mind, recognizing the mind. I have a few more things to say, but maybe I will leave it here for today, because it seems that our time is up, and I don't want to bring you to utter distraction with my long talks. And so maybe it's a good time to stop. And this is what we're going to pick up next week. Karma willing. So any last comment or questions before we finish off for today? All right. So we'll leave it here for now. And it's a real pleasure, by the way, to see you again, to see some of you again. No, when I see you here on the screen, really, I kind of think myself, I missed you guys. And so thank you very much. We're gonna finish off with dedicating all the merit, all the positive potential that we have created together in listening to those teachings. We often use dedication verses for dedicating our virtue. And I think that I will share them on the screen together with you. But before we recite them together, we can also think that we're going to dedicate them to the full recovery of His Holiness the Dalai Lama that has underwent knee replacement operation. I believe that it was in the US, and since he's doing very well. And so it's good to have teachers like him around for many years to come, and also without pain, without discomfort, so that they continue to teach us. But just as well, all the other teachers that we study with within Thupten Nobeling and other centers. And so wish them to be well. Also wishing for the elections in the US to go well, whatever the outcome might be, may be of benefit to as many people as possible, less harm to as many people as possible. And may everyone develops Pham Bodhicitta, beginning with ourselves. And so let's do those dedications together. May the Supreme Jewel Bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of happiness and good. All-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remember to samsara ends. Now, I have here a prayer that we use when Kapchen Lama Sopran, which was still alive. I think that we can still use it. Thinking that we hope and wish that he will quickly be back with us. So, savor of the Snowland teachings. Sorry, that's a prayer for His Holiness the Dalai Lama. The prayer for Lama Sopran, which is coming next. So, the Dalai Lama, savor of the Snowland teachings and transmigratory beings, who makes extremely clear the path that is unification of emptiness and compassion. To the Lotus Holder, Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And long life prayer for Kyabje Lama Sopran Rinpoche, or wishing him to come back to us quickly. You uphold the Subdue's moral way, who serves the bountiful bearer of false, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Bajanath's victorious doctrine. Who masterfully accomplished magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, savor of myself and others, your disciples. Please come back to us quickly. All right, managed to save it by the skin of my teeth.